Hello and welcome to the DMPL Podcast. I'm Aaron Gurnis, your host, and we are back. We had a little bit of a break there over the past few months, but we have Iowa authors back on the DMPL Podcast today, and we're starting with Megan Bannister. She is the author of the great little travel guide for Iowa. It's called Secret Iowa, a guide to the weird, wonderful, and obscure. And it came out last winter, Megan?
Yeah, September of last year.
Yeah, so congratulations on the book. How are you doing today?
Thanks. I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing good. It's been great to have you here in the studio. I mean, we love talking to Iowa authors, but when we can get them right here and get that nice, clean, crisp audio as well, it's really great. So yeah, good seeing you. Tell me a little bit about how it's been with this book. I think it's your second book, right?
It is, yeah. This is my second book. My first one, Iowa Supper Clubs, is a guide to kind of classic restaurants, past and present. And it came out like summer 2020, so not a great time for atmospheric dining or book events. So it's been really fun with this one to get to kind of be out in the world and share it with people and get to do some events and signings and talk to people about it.
So tell us a little bit about getting into this book. And it's travel. How would you describe it? It's a travel guide around some of the I don't want to say oddest, but just kind of like obscure, I guess, is the best word for it. The things that people might not know about, even the most, Iowans might not have heard of some of these sites that you wrote about in the book. So why did you want to write about this?
Yeah, so I have always had kind of a soft spot for weird and wacky things, roadside attractions. I'm typically that friend on a road trip that's like, hey, I heard about the world's largest loon. It's 5 minutes off the road. And like an hour later, we're horribly lost and everyone is upset that I've like dragged them on this wild goose chase, literally for that one. But yeah, so I've always loved things like that. And so this was a really nice fit. This is actually a series that the publisher does of secret books. So there are other secret titles out in the world. So you might see Secret Wisconsin or Secret Kansas, but there wasn't an Iowa title. And so when the opportunity came up to be able to write that, it just seemed like the perfect fit for kind of the hidden gems I like to write about in other aspects of my life.
Yeah, so each hidden gem, quote unquote, in this book is just a little 2-page spread with a description, a little bit who, what, maybe a cost if there's any cost, and where it's at, of course. How many of these are there in this book?
There are 84 places all over the state.
84 places all over the state. And of course, I was just going to open up to one that I bookmarked earlier. This is one that I had wondered about before because I'd seen it, the Golden Spike in Council Bluffs. When you're driving, you can see that sometimes. And it's, I always wondered why that existed. And, I could probably find it out if I really, but it's one of those things you think about when you pass by and then you don't pull out your phone because you're not supposed to text or whatever. And then,
absolutely.
And then what do you don't think about it again, but it's great to see stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, and so many of the things that are like that, even if you do stop, don't necessarily have, any information about what it is or why it's there. And so that was the really fun piece, to be able to dig into some of those too and see like, okay, what is the story behind this random thing? How did it get here? And then, give people the resources to visit it today. So that's for each of the 84 places. That was one of the criteria, was there had to be a physical location that people could still go visit. So even for the ones that are kind of history based, there is still somewhere where you could go to experience that piece of Iowa history.
So how did you come up with this list? Did you already know a bunch of them?
Yeah, it was really a process. So I'm a big spreadsheet person. And so I love a list. And so I started with just kind of a brain dump of like, okay, here are, all of the weird and wacky things I can think of. And then it was a lot of like crowdsourcing. There's a good amount of places in there that like people would be like, hey, have you ever heard about this random thing? Or like, do you know the story behind this thing? And some of those made it in. And then I spent a lot of time trying to make sure there was a really good distribution of them from around the state. Mm-hmm. I'm based in central Iowa, but I wanted to make sure that like, just because I live here, there's not 30 of the 84 in kind of the central Iowa region. And that there's a really good mix of things to do all over the map, and then also making sure that they are good enough secrets. I am not originally an Iowan. I grew up in Illinois, but have lived here for the past about 15 years, and so I spent a lot of time quizzing my in-laws and friends and family and that kind of thing on like, hey, do you know about this? Is this a good enough secret? Because I also tend to know about more weird and wacky things than the average person, just because I'm interested in them.
Tell us about becoming kind of an Iowa travel connoisseur. I mean, I think I've read before, I think on your bio that on your website, you love road trips, that sort of thing. But What has taken you across the state before to get to the point where you were comfortable writing this book to begin with? Because I'm sure that even though you hadn't seen all of these locations before you started writing, you had seen a lot of them or heard of a lot of them.
Yeah. So my background is in journalism. I moved to Iowa to go to Drake and have worked in kind of varying degrees of journalism and marketing since then. And so kind of in the process of graduating college and getting to know Iowa since I had decided to stay here, I just started a blog just for fun of like, what are some, day trips or things that I was seeing when friends and I would say like, we're just going to take an afternoon and like pick a direction and drive.
And you would just do that in college? Like you would just be like, I want to go northwest. Let's see what's out there.
Yeah, we'd be like, hey, we heard about this thing. We're just going to like go for the day and like drive a loop. So it kind of started organically that way and then has kind of grown into the blog and platform that I have today, and through kind of that and then freelance writing and some other things. Yeah, it really has just been, this was like a composite of all of those years of kind of taking notes and taking photos of all of the weird and wacky things that Iowa has.
So when you're in college, what's the most ambitious trip that you guys took for a day?
For a day,
or maybe overnight too, if you took an overnight trip.
Well, so my senior year spring break, a group of friends and I drove from Des Moines to San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
So that was like a big road trip that we did, which was really fun, but definitely longer than a day trip. We one time did a day and back, like in the same day, drove up to northern Iowa to the Grotto of the Redemption.
Yeah.
And then did like a loop around to there, to Sac City, to the world's largest popcorn ball. And like saw some things up in that area. So that was probably one of the longer ones because that gets into like a 5-6 hour day in the car.
Yeah, well, in some of those places you're not necessarily going a straight shot on the interstate either.
You have to back road. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how many times have you found yourself looking at one of the, because Iowa has roads that are in grids, you know, it's not like, if some of other smaller states, there's maybe like 2 roads that can get you from point A to point B, and it can be hard to get lost almost in a sense. And here I feel like because it's the grids and the flat out there in a lot of parts of the state, not all parts, but a lot of parts. If you don't have your GPS on, or even your GPS sometimes might not know exactly what's going on. So have you ever been kind of like wandering out there, wondering exactly where to go?
Yes. Yeah. I'm a big fan of offline maps.
Nice.
So I usually at any given point have like the whole state downloaded. And then I also always have like a paper atlas in my car just in case.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely been times where I'm like, okay, I don't know where I am, or I drive a Honda Fit, which is not an all-terrain vehicle. And so some of the things for this book, and specifically like trying to go get photos for this book, there was a couple times where there were level B roads that I was like, okay, I have to turn around. Otherwise someone's going to be pulling me out of the mud or a ditch.
Tell us about a couple of those sites. Yeah.
So there's a few. One of them is over by Audubon, so Brayton, where you can find the tree in the middle of the road. And it truly is where 2 level B roads cross. And on, dry summer, totally fine. If it has been snowy or rainy, it gets pretty muddy and pretty bumpy quickly. And so that is one to always definitely be careful about. But yeah, that's, if you're in the area, it's a fun, quick stop for a photo op. And the story behind that one, in a similar sense of like, how does this tree get here? This is one of my favorite, like, take it or leave it stories, but a friend who's really into like family genealogy and kind of local history had connected with the descendants of the 2 men that are apparently responsible for it. And they had been marking the county line and cut a switch from a cottonwood tree and then to use as a walking stick. And then when they got to the point where they were ready to mark the line, they realized they didn't have anything to mark it with. And so the story goes that they used the cottonwood stick as a marker, and it took root and is now this giant, it's probably like arm's width around, giant tree in the middle of the road.
And it's sitting on the county line.
Mm-hmm, yep, and it's still there.
What are some of your other favorite things that you discovered in the process of writing this book?
Yeah, there's one in southeast Iowa that was a place that a friend mentioned to me that she was like, yeah, this is like the place that in high school we would like all go to, but I have no idea why it's there. And it is in like an unincorporated part of Avery, so down kind of in the southeast part of the state. And it is a to scale replica of the pyramids of Giza. There are 2 small ones, and then there's one, the biggest one is about 15 feet tall. And it was built by a man who was the town's like newspaper publisher in the 1930s. He was in his 70s at the time and commissioned some friends because he got really into Egyptology. And his plan was that he was going to be entombed in the largest one, seated upright, facing his friend with his printing press in between them. That did not end up happening, but they have been there for almost 100 years now, and they are still there. And it's just like a weird kind of wacky driving by, like, what is that?
These are the kind of things that people did before, like, they had the internet and TV.
Absolutely.
they planned themselves out and commissioned to scale replicas of the pyramids of Gaza.
Exactly. Yeah. No.
Tell us a little bit about, you talked about 2020, the Cyper Club book. You didn't really get a chance to go on tour. It was in the middle of the pandemic. And now you've had this really popular book. In fact, I think we were talking offline. I heard this before. You outsold Prince Harry down at a bookstore in Oskaloosa.
I did. Yeah. The Book Vault in Oskaloosa. Shout out to all of the great Iowa indie bookstores and public libraries around the state. I've got to do some really fun events with them. But yeah, the Book Vault did their like best-selling titles of the year. And I was so delighted to see Secret Iowa was their #1 best-selling title. Besting, Prince Harry, Evelyn Hugo. I'm trying to think what some of the other popular ones. Iron Flame, I think. So it was a nice ego boost and a thing I will definitely be using in my marketing with a tiny asterisk from now on.
So what has the experience been like sharing this, and who have you been talking to about this? Obviously, like you said, you've been going to libraries, but I'm sure there's a lot of community groups that are really interested in these things too.
Yeah, it's been really fun to get to kind of partner with some different people in different ways. So I've done some more traditional book signings at, indie bookstores and things like that. But then I've also gotten to talk to some like Kiwanis groups, breakfast clubs, that type of thing. I've gotten to do some really fun event partnerships. And so we did for Wyatt Earp Days down in Pella, the Pella Historical Museum's compound that they have includes the Wyatt Earp Boyhood Home, which I think a lot of people don't know is in Iowa. And so that's in the book. And so for their Wyatt Earp Days, the end of September, we actually did Secret Iowa trivia with some fun kind of roadside attraction trivia, and then also a Wyatt Earp round that their Wyatt Earp impersonator got to read the answers about himself for, which was very fun. And then a lot of like really cool presentations, just getting to share different snippets of the book with people from different parts of the state, and it's been really fun to see kind of what resonates with groups kind of all around.
Well, what has resonated?
I think a lot of the time it's been really fun to hear the places that, because I have a couple that I talk about at most talks, and then I'll kind of swap out based on what things are kind of local-ish to where I'm speaking. And a lot of the time, places that are close by to people have been places that they are the least familiar with, which I think has been really, really fun to get to say like, hey, this cool thing exists like less than an hour from you. And you can go see it without, needing a new tank of gas or spending a lot of money. A lot of the things in the book are free or have a really low admission cost. So that has been fun to share with people too, and maybe get them out exploring their backyard a little more.
So we're talking about things that even like maybe a lot of the most like Iowa-pilled history buffs maybe don't know about in this book.
Yeah. And it kind of trying to think through like, what are some things that maybe aren't secret as a place, but have secrets about them.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it too.
And so for like one of them, the Iowa State Fair obviously is not a secret to anyone. If you know maybe one thing about Iowa, if you're not from here, it's probably relating to the state fair. But I really wanted to find a way to include a state fair angle in some way.
Of course, it's Iowa.
Yeah, you kind of have to.
State Fair's got to have secrets somewhere.
Yeah, and so I'm a big fan of the State Fair Museum. We go every year. It's also beautifully air conditioned, so that's my hot tip. But they do a really nice job. They have some really cool fair history there. And one of the things I had learned about over the years was the baby elephant that after the Great Depression, they essentially crowdfunded money from children around the state to try to drive fair attendance. They were worried people wouldn't come to the fair because financial times had been so tight. And so they had children from all over the state send in nickels and dimes to the elephant editor at the paper. And then they purchased a baby elephant. Her name was Baby Mine, which was also part of the contest, was naming her. And she ended up living at the fair for like 13 years. I think before they realized that it was cost prohibitive for them to have a 4,000-pound now elephant living at the fairgrounds.
2 weeks a year that people
Yeah, well, and she like traveled the country. They had like a dedicated employee. It's a whole really, really interesting story. But now you can go see some really cool pictures and kind of historical elements from her story at the Fair Museum. But they also, and now that you know about them, you'll see them. But if you're at the fair in like the Hy-Vee Fun Forest kind of kids playground area, they actually have little cement elephant statues. And they don't have any information. They just have like a little marker that says Baby Mine on them. But I thought that was just a really fun kind of fair secret for a place that, people are probably pretty familiar with.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Give me a couple day trips from Des Moines that people can make, say a couple hours each way.
Yeah, I think a really fun one that had been on my Iowa bucket list for quite some time that I hadn't made it to until I was doing the prep work for this book is the Salt and Pepper Shaker Gallery in Traer. And so Traer is kind of between Marshalltown and Cedar Falls, Waterloo area. So a couple hours each way, give or take. But it is the collection of one woman. Her name is Ruth Rasmussen. And that was her lifelong hobby, was collecting salt and pepper shakers. In the early 2000s, she sold the collection to the city so they could continue taking care of it. But it is more than 15,000 pairs of salt and pepper shakers that they have on display that are all her collection. And they've done a really nice job. They've organized it by theme. So there's like a little market with all the fruits and vegetables. And then there's a section that's all cats. There's a section that are like the PG-13 ones and a little cupboard. It is really a delightful time. I think it's $5 for adult admission, so it won't break the bank. That's a really fun one. While you're up that way, you can see Iowa's largest frying pan in Brandon. Not the world's largest, but Iowa's largest. So that's a good one for that direction. If you're headed up north toward Ames, Ryman Gardens has the world's largest concrete garden gnome. His name is Elwood. So if you happen to be visiting Ryman Gardens, that one's a fun little place you can pop in. And then if you want to drive a little bit further, another one of my favorites is always the world's largest popcorn ball in Sac City. It is yes, it is fun. It is a little bit gross. People's first question is always like, is it real popcorn? It is.
Is their second question why?
Yeah. And it is, I'm sure, so congealed, but it is essentially in like a windowed garden shed that you can just peek at all times. And it is also one of my favorite tidbits that I learned researching it and talking to one of their tourism folks was that this is the fourth world's largest popcorn ball they have made over the years. They've been at it since the 90s and have gotten bested. And so this time they decided they were just going to like go really big and spend this one since I want to say like 2016. But one of the first ones, when they had to dispose of it, obviously it's been sitting for a while and it's popcorn and corn syrup. So it's gotten pretty congealed. They thought it would be fun to load it up with dynamite at the county fair and explode it over the grandstand. And I think the thought was that it would like rain popcorn. Instead, it flew in the air and like broke into a couple pieces because it was so solid at that point. So that's one of my favorites just for like some gross gawking. Okay.
And then take away Secret Iowa in general. You're the travel expert here in Iowa. What's just a nice little weekend or nice little 1 or 2 weekend trips away for people if they want to go somewhere away from the metro for a weekend?
Yeah, I think one of my favorites is always the Mason City, Clear Lake area. I think even during the winter, there's a lot of really cool things to do and see there, and just kind of have like a cozy time. Especially, Clear Lake in the winter, they have a kite festival that'll happen like the middle of February, which is a lot of fun. And then Mason City, you can eat some really good food, stay in a Frank Lloyd Wright hotel, which is the only one in the world, which is really, really special. Where else do I love to go? I enjoy an Eastern Iowa getaway as well. We had friends who lived in Mount Vernon for many years, kind of just east of Cedar Rapids. So still close to plenty of things to do, but kind of its own little like Stars Hollow downtown. So that's a very cute option as well. And then also, the like Decorah area, I think any time of year is a really, really fun weekend getaway. You can do some outside things. You can do some inside things. You can eat a lot of good food and drink a lot of good beer. So those are my picks, I think.
Awesome. And then I guess one more question popped in my head just because you're the travel expert. What's your favorite road in Iowa?
Oh, that's a good question.
Road, street, anything like that.
Street.
If you don't have a good if it's too many roads come to mind, just feel free to name a couple. But
no, I think this is so funny because I do have one. My favorite stretch, I think, is part of the Great River Road. So along the Mississippi River, kind of between LeClaire and the Quad Cities, you can drive the Great River Road like really, really close to the river, kind of all the way down. It's definitely not the most direct way to get from LeClaire to the Quad Cities.
But it's the prettiest.
But it's very pretty, especially really any time of year, but especially in the fall. It's a favorite for sure.
Yeah, and then you probably might have a lot of time to spend there too, because sometimes you get the drivers that are also spending a lot of time.
Yes, it's a more leisurely pace for sure.
So if you're taking that, be sure you're ready to take that. But it is. I haven't driven that stretch, but I've driven stretches further north, and they're always really beautiful. So, all right. Well, we talked about maybe like 8 of these 84 locations. There's so much in this book, Secret Iowa, a guide to the weird, wonderful, and obscene. You can check it out here from the Des Moines Public Library, and of course, you can find it at all your local independent bookstores as well. Megan, thank you so much for joining us today. We can't wait to see what else you might have up your sleeve here in the near future as you talk about traveling Iowa, history, all of that. So, thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.